Come get it, 50.
But for Rick Ross, there's certain artists that it would say things about 50 Cent and that would generate their energy.
50 Cent had some huge records when he had the biggest producers and artists around him putting them together. That's why right now he can't make nothing.
Their whole career has been based on that. So it's not a surprise that they try to do that to continue the relevance. I'm looking going, good luck, because you're trying to sell a CD at the present moment and I'm not trying to sell music.
The feud between Rick Ross and 50 Cent has been going on for years. But according to fans, this latest round may have hit harder than anything we've seen in a long time. Because this time, 50 Cent wasn't mocking a song. He wasn't attacking a business deal. And he wasn't joking about an old rap beef. Instead, he aimed directly at something Rick Ross has spent nearly 2 decades building. His image. His reputation. And most importantly, his wealth. During a recent podcast appearance, 50 openly questioned whether Ross' luxury lifestyle is really as impressive as it appears online. He mocked Ross' massive Georgia estate. He joked about Ross cutting his own grass. And he suggested that maintaining such a huge property may be far more difficult than people realize. The comments instantly exploded across social media. Fans began debating. Critics started digging through public records. And suddenly, people weren't just talking about rap anymore. They were talking about finances. Meanwhile, Ross wasn't about to stay silent. The Maybach music boss fired back almost immediately, bragging about his real estate empire, private jet, luxury assets, and business ventures. But according to many observers, that response may have created even more questions. Because once fans started looking deeper into tax records, property loans, and public filings, the conversation became much bigger than a simple Instagram exchange. Did 50 Cent really expose something? Or was this just another chapter in hip-hop's longest-running rivalry? Because according to many fans, what happened next shocked everyone. Because according to many fans, what happened next shocked everyone. The moment 50 Cent's comments started making the rounds online, the conversation changed completely. At first, people thought it was just another joke. Just another episode in one of hip-hop's longest-running feuds. After all, 50 Cent and Rick Ross have been trading shots for years. Fans have seen diss tracks. They've seen Instagram posts. They've seen interviews filled with subtle jabs and direct insults. So when 50 started joking about Ross cutting his own grass and maintaining his massive Georgia estate, many people assumed it would disappear within a day or two. But that's not what happened. Instead, the comments spread like wildfire. Millions of views. Thousands of reposts. And suddenly everyone was asking the same question. Why was 50 focusing so heavily on Rick Ross money? Because if there's one thing Rick Ross has built his entire career around, it's the image of success. From the very beginning, Ross presented himself as a larger-than-life figure. Luxury cars. Massive mansions. Private jets. Designer clothes. Business investments. Everything about the Rick Ross brand has always screamed wealth. That's why 50's comments landed differently. He wasn't attacking Ross as a rapper. He was attacking the very foundation of the image Ross spent years creating. And according to many observers, that's exactly why the internet paid attention. Meanwhile, Ross wasn't staying quiet. Not even for a second. Almost immediately, he began responding publicly. Videos appeared online. Instagram posts followed. And Ross started reminding everyone about the assets he owns. His real estate portfolio. His luxury properties. His business investments. His private jet. His partnerships with major brands. Ross wanted the world to know one thing. He wasn't broke. Far from it. But according to many fans, the speed of the response actually fueled the discussion even more. Because whenever someone rushes to defend their finances publicly, people naturally become curious. They start asking questions. They start looking deeper. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, social media users weren't just sharing clips anymore. They were digging, looking through public records, reading articles, checking property information, and trying to figure out whether there was any truth behind 50 Cent's claims. That's when things started getting uncomfortable. Because according to reports discussed online, attention quickly turned toward Ross' famous Georgia estate known as the Promised Land. The property is enormous. Hundreds of acres. One of the largest celebrity estates in America. And a major symbol of Ross' public image. For years, fans viewed the estate as proof of Ross' success. It appeared in videos. It appeared in interviews. And it became part of the mythology surrounding the Maybach music boss. But according to commentators, 50 Cent's criticism forced people to look at the estate differently. Instead of asking how impressive it was, people started asking how expensive it was. And that is a very different conversation. Because massive properties require massive spending. Maintenance, taxes, staff, repairs, security, landscaping. The larger the property becomes, the larger the expenses become. That's basic business. And according to 50, that was exactly the point he was trying to make. Meanwhile, another issue began generating headlines. Public tax records. According to reports that quickly spread online, a property tax issue connected to Ross Georgia estate had reportedly grown over time because of penalties, interest, and collection costs. Now, many financial experts pointed out something important. A tax issue doesn't automatically mean someone is broke. Not even close. Wealthy people deal with tax disputes, financing arrangements, and complex business structures all the time. But that's not how social media works. Social media doesn't care about nuance. Social media cares about headlines. And the headline people saw was simple. 50 Cent questioned Ross money. Then reports about taxes started spreading. And suddenly the internet connected the dots, whether those dots belonged together or not. Meanwhile, 50 wasn't slowing down. In fact, many fans felt like he was enjoying every second of it. Because if there's one thing 50 Cent understands better than almost anyone in entertainment, it's attention. He knows how to create conversations. He knows how to dominate headlines. And he knows exactly which buttons to push. According to many observers, attacking Ross' finances was one of the smartest moves he could have made. Why? Because money is central to the Rick Ross brand. Question the music and fans argue. Question the wealth and everyone starts investigating. That's exactly what happened. Everywhere you looked, people were debating the same issue. Was Ross really as wealthy as he claimed? Or was 50 exposing something hidden beneath the luxury image? Meanwhile, Ross continued pushing back. He reminded fans about his investments. He talked about properties that had increased in value. He emphasized long-term wealth building rather than short-term appearances. And he made it clear that he viewed real estate as a powerful asset rather than a burden. To Ross supporters, that response made perfect sense. They argued that successful investors often use loans, leverage, and financing to expand their portfolios. That's how business works. But critics weren't convinced. Because according to them, the issue wasn't whether Ross owned impressive assets. The issue was whether the public image matched the financial reality. And according to many observers, that's the exact pressure point 50 Cent has attacked for years. Not just money. Authenticity. The question isn't whether Rick Ross has wealth. The question is whether the version of wealth shown online tells the entire story. And as more people started examining records, mortgages, financing arrangements, and public filings, the conversation became bigger than either artist probably expected. Because this was no longer just another rap beef. This was becoming a public investigation into the empire Rick Ross spent nearly 20 years building. And according to many fans, the most explosive revelations were still to come. And according to many fans, the most explosive revelations were still to come. Because as social media users continued digging into public records and financial discussions, the conversation began moving far beyond memes and Instagram jokes. Suddenly, people weren't just talking about what 50 Cent said. They were talking about whether he might have accidentally triggered a much bigger discussion about Rick Ross' entire business empire. For years, Ross has carefully built one of the strongest brands in hip-hop. Unlike artists who focus only on music, Ross positioned himself as a businessman, a mogul, a real estate investor, a franchise owner, a luxury lifestyle expert. Every interview reinforced that image. Every social media post reinforced that image. And every major purchase reinforced that image. Fans didn't just see Rick Ross as a rapper. They saw him as a symbol of financial success. That's why the criticism hit so differently. Because when 50 questioned Ross money, he wasn't attacking a side project. He was attacking the centerpiece of Ross' entire public identity. Meanwhile, commentators began pointing toward another issue: financing. According to public reports discussed online, Ross had secured major financing connected to some of his luxury real estate holdings, including his famous Star Island property in Miami. Now, to experienced investors, financing isn't unusual. In fact, it's common. Many wealthy people use loans strategically. They preserve cash. They leverage assets. And they expand portfolios through financing structures. That's normal business practice. But social media rarely views things through a business lens. Instead, people started asking questions. If Ross is worth hundreds of millions, why use financing? Why take loans? Why not simply pay cash? Financial experts quickly pointed out that wealthy investors often prefer leverage because it allows them to keep money working elsewhere. But once a controversy starts online, explanations rarely slow things down. Instead, the speculation kept growing. Meanwhile, 50 Cent continued watching the reaction unfold. And according to many observers, he knew exactly what was happening. Because this wasn't the first time he had targeted Ross' credibility. Not even close. In fact, many longtime hip-hop fans immediately recognized the pattern. Whenever 50 attacks Ross, he almost always focuses on authenticity. The same strategy has been used repeatedly throughout their rivalry. Years ago, it was the correctional officer controversy. Then it was business claims. Then lifestyle claims. And now it was financial image. The target remains the same. Make people question whether the public image matches reality. And according to many fans, that strategy has always been effective. Because once doubt enters the conversation, people start investigating for themselves. That's exactly what happened this time. Meanwhile, Ross attempted to shift attention toward his achievements. And to be fair, there were plenty of achievements to discuss. Chart-topping albums. Millions of records sold. Maybach Music Group. Multiple franchise investments. Real estate acquisitions. Luxury partnerships. Ross has undeniably built an impressive career over nearly 2 decades. Supporters quickly pointed that out. They argued that critics were focusing on isolated financial reports while ignoring years of documented success. According to them, a person doesn't build an empire accidentally. Success at Ross level requires planning, execution, and smart decision-making. Those arguments gained traction. But so did the criticism. because critics argued something else. They weren't saying Ross had no money. They were saying the image may be larger than reality. And according to many observers, that distinction is important. There's a huge difference between being wealthy and appearing infinitely wealthy. One is reality. The other is branding. And branding has always been central to hip-hop culture. Meanwhile, another development added fuel to the fire. The Millennium Tour. When Ross appeared as a special guest on the tour, 50 wasted no time taking shots. He mocked the appearance. He suggested Ross couldn't sell tickets alone. And he turned another routine business move into another opportunity for criticism. The comments quickly spread. Again. And once again the internet exploded. Because by this point, every interaction between these two artists had become content. Every joke became a headline. Every response became a viral clip. And every accusation became a debate. According to commentators, that's one reason the feud has survived for so long. Neither man understands how to create attention better than these two. Meanwhile, Ross continued firing back. He mocked 50's lifestyle. He challenged his credibility. And he even suggested he could create business opportunities for the very person criticizing him. That response generated headlines of its own. But according to many observers, something had changed. This time people weren't focusing on the insults. They were focusing on the numbers. The properties. The loans. The tax discussions. The financial records. And according to analysts, that's exactly why this chapter of the feud felt different. Because previous arguments centered on music. This one centered on money. And money conversations tend to make people pay attention. Especially when the individuals involved have spent years promoting luxury lifestyles. Meanwhile, another reality became impossible to ignore. Neither side was likely to back down. 50 has spent over 15 years challenging Ross whenever opportunities arise. Ross has spent over 15 years responding. And according to many fans, the rivalry has become bigger than the original dispute itself. At this point, the feud has become part of hip-hop history. A rivalry spanning albums, businesses, social media platforms, interviews, and countless public exchanges. But despite all those years, one thing remains remarkably consistent. The battle is always about image. Who is more successful? Who is more respected? Who is more authentic? And perhaps most importantly, who can control the public narrative? Because in today's entertainment world, perception is often just as valuable as reality. And according to many observers, 50 Cent understands that better than almost anyone. That's why his comments created such a massive reaction. Not because they proved anything, but because they made people ask questions. Questions that millions of fans immediately started trying to answer for themselves. And as more financial information continued surfacing online, those questions only became louder. Because what fans were about to discover next would push the feud into an entirely new level of controversy. Because what fans were about to discover next would push the feud into an entirely new level of controversy. At this point, the discussion had moved far beyond jokes. Far beyond memes. And far beyond the usual back and forth insults that fans had come to expect from Rick Ross and 50 Cent. Instead, people started looking at the bigger picture. The history. The pattern. And according to many observers, that pattern revealed something interesting. For more than 15 years, 50 Cent has consistently targeted one specific weakness whenever he clashes with Rick Ross. Not his music. Not his popularity. Not even his business ventures. His credibility. Every major chapter of their feud seems to follow the same formula. 50 identifies something connected to Ross' public image. He shines a spotlight on it. He turns it into a conversation. And then he lets the internet do the rest. That's exactly what happened with the famous Officer Ricky controversy years ago. When reports surfaced showing Ross had previously worked as a correctional officer, 50 immediately seized the opportunity. At the time, Ross had built much of his public persona around street credibility and larger-than-life storytelling. Suddenly, fans found themselves debating whether the image matched the reality. Sound familiar? Because according to many hip-hop analysts, it's the exact same strategy 50 is using today. Only now the target isn't Ross' background. It's his finances. And according to many observers, that makes the situation even more sensitive. Why? Because Ross has spent nearly 2 decades promoting success. His entire brand revolves around winning. Luxury, power, ownership, boss status. Every album, every interview, every business announcement reinforces that message. So when someone publicly questions the financial foundation behind that image, the impact can be enormous. Meanwhile, fans began comparing the different ways both artists responded to pressure. 50's strategy was simple. Attack, mock, create headlines, force reactions. Ross' strategy was different. He responded by showcasing assets, properties, business partnerships, investments, and luxury purchases. According to supporters, that response made sense. If someone questions your success, show your success. Simple. But critics argued something else. They claimed Ross was accidentally proving 50's point. Because the more he focused on displaying wealth, the more people started investigating the details behind that wealth. And those investigations created an entirely new conversation. One focused on debt, loans, financing, property costs, and long-term expenses. Now, financial experts repeatedly pointed out something important. Debt does not equal poverty. Loans do not equal failure. And financing does not equal financial trouble. Many billionaires use leverage every day. Many corporations operate with debt. Many wealthy investors borrow money strategically. That's normal. But once social media gets involved, complexity disappears. Everything becomes simplified. Everything becomes exaggerated. And suddenly nuanced financial discussions become viral debates. Meanwhile, another issue started attracting attention. Ross' enormous real estate empire. Because according to public discussions, owning major properties isn't just about buying them. It's about maintaining them. Every luxury estate comes with costs. Taxes, insurance, staff, repairs, landscaping, security, utilities, and countless other expenses. For most people, those numbers are difficult to imagine. And according to commentators, that's why 50's comments about the promised land estate resonated so strongly. He wasn't criticizing the purchase itself. He was questioning the ongoing burden that comes with maintaining something so massive. That argument sparked another wave of debate. Supporters argued Ross could clearly afford it. Critics questioned whether appearances matched reality. And once again, social media exploded. Meanwhile, the feud began reaching audiences beyond traditional hip-hop fans. Business commentators got involved. Financial influencers got involved. Entertainment media got involved. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about rap anymore. It was about wealth, image, and the difference between public perception and financial reality. According to many analysts, that's what made this chapter of the rivalry so fascinating. because both men represent different versions of success. 50 Cent often promotes financial discipline, investments, and calculated business moves. Rick Ross promotes luxury, expansion, ownership, and visible success. Neither approach is necessarily wrong, but they create very different public images. And when those images collide, controversy follows. Meanwhile, many fans notice something else. Despite all the criticism, Ross continued moving forward with major business activity. Real estate purchases, partnerships, brand deals, and new investments kept appearing. That created another dilemma for critics. Because while public records raised questions, Ross also continued making moves that didn't look like the actions of someone facing collapse. Supporters quickly highlighted that contradiction. They argued that successful entrepreneurs often face criticism precisely because they operate at large scales. The bigger the empire becomes, the bigger the scrutiny becomes. The bigger the scrutiny becomes, the more opportunities critics have to find isolated issues. Meanwhile, 50 remained relentless. Every new headline became fresh ammunition. Every report became a new opportunity. And every response from Ross created another cycle of attention. According to many observers, that relentless pressure is one reason 50 has remained such a powerful media figure for so long. He understands narratives. He understands controversy. And perhaps most importantly, he understands timing. Because just when it looked like the conversation might start fading away, another revelation emerged. Another set of numbers. Another financial discussion. Another piece of information that sent social media into overdrive. And according to many fans, this next development may have been the most damaging of all. Because it forced people to ask a question Rick Ross never wanted trending online. What does his empire actually look like behind the scenes? And once that question started spreading, there was no stopping it. And once that question started spreading, there was no stopping it. Because at this point, the conversation had become much bigger than Rick Ross and 50 Cent. It had become a debate about perception versus reality. A debate about celebrity wealth. And a debate about how much of what fans see online is actually true. According to many observers, that's exactly why this chapter of the feud exploded the way it did. People weren't just watching two rappers argue anymore. They were trying to figure out what was real. Meanwhile, as more discussions surfaced online, attention continued focusing on Ross' financial structure. Not because anyone had proven he was broke. In fact, many reports suggested the exact opposite. Ross still owned major assets. He still controlled valuable properties. He still had business ventures producing revenue. And he still maintained one of the most recognizable brands in hip-hop. But critics argued that wasn't the point. The point, they claimed, was whether the image being presented matched the full financial picture. And according to many commentators, that's where 50's attack became effective. Because he wasn't saying Ross had no money. He was questioning whether the public version of Rick Ross was larger than the reality behind it. That distinction changed everything. Suddenly, fans began examining old interviews, old purchases, old business claims, and old statements. Every piece of information became part of a much larger puzzle. Meanwhile, Ross supporters pushed back hard. They pointed to his long list of accomplishments. Multiple #1 albums. Years of touring. Ownership stakes. Brand partnerships. Franchise investments. And a real estate portfolio most people could only dream about. According to supporters, successful people use debt. Successful people use leverage. Successful people use financing. That's how modern business works. And they argued that critics were treating ordinary business practices as signs of weakness. Many financial experts agreed. Because financing a property doesn't automatically mean financial trouble. Taking a loan doesn't automatically mean cash flow problems. And carrying debt doesn't automatically mean someone lacks wealth. But once again, social media wasn't interested in nuance. Social media wanted drama. And drama was exactly what it got. Meanwhile, another reason the story gained momentum was timing. Because Ross had already been dealing with criticism from several different directions. Questions about business decisions. Questions about rap industry alliances. Questions about public statements. And according to observers, 50 saw an opportunity. He stepped into an already active conversation and poured gasoline on the fire. The result was immediate. Every entertainment blog picked up the story. Every hip-hop page covered the feud. And every major social media platform became flooded with clips, reactions, and opinions. According to analysts, that's what separates 50 from many other celebrities. He understands how to control attention. Even when he's not releasing music. Even when he's not promoting a television show. He still finds ways to dominate headlines. And in this case, he managed to shift the entire conversation toward Ross finances. Meanwhile, many fans began revisiting the history of the rivalry itself. Because this feud didn't start yesterday. It didn't start last year. And it didn't even start this decade. The conflict stretches back more than 15 years. Over that time, both artists have exchanged diss tracks, insults, interviews, social media attacks, and countless public criticisms. Yet according to many observers, neither side has ever landed a definitive knockout blow. Instead, the feud survives because each new chapter creates fresh controversy. And this chapter may be one of the biggest yet. Why? Because money is personal. Reputation is personal. And public image is personal. Especially for someone whose entire brand revolves around success. Meanwhile, another fascinating detail started emerging. Despite all the criticism, Ross wasn't retreating. He wasn't disappearing. And he wasn't acting like someone defeated. Instead, he continued posting. Continued promoting businesses. Continued discussing investments. And continued behaving like a man completely confident in his position. That confidence created another divide among fans. Supporters saw strength. Critics saw damage control. And neutral observers saw something else entirely. Two master marketers using controversy to keep themselves at the center of public attention. Because according to many industry insiders, both Ross and 50 understand something important. Attention equals value. And few things create attention faster than conflict. Meanwhile, as the numbers, records, and reports continued circulating online, a new question started replacing all the others. The debate was no longer about whether Ross had money. Most people agreed he did. The debate became whether his empire was as unstoppable as it appeared. And according to many observers, that's the exact question 50 wanted people asking from the very beginning. Because once people begin questioning perception, every future move becomes subject to scrutiny. Every purchase becomes a headline. Every investment becomes a debate. And every success becomes something critics attempt to challenge. Which is exactly what happened next. Because as the internet continued dissecting Ross' empire, fans started noticing something that made this controversy even more complicated. Something that suggested the truth might not be as simple as either side wanted people to believe. Because as the internet continued dissecting Ross' empire, fans started noticing something that made this controversy even more complicated. Something that suggested the truth might not be as simple as either side wanted people to believe. And that truth was this. Rick Ross is clearly successful. But 50 Cent may have successfully changed the conversation. For years, whenever people talked about Rick Ross, they talked about luxury. The mansions, the cars, the private jets, the jewelry, the lifestyle. The image was almost untouchable. But after 50's latest comments, people suddenly started asking different questions. Questions about financing. Questions about taxes. Questions about operating costs. Questions about whether maintaining a giant empire is harder than it looks. And according to many observers, that's exactly why this chapter of the feud felt so significant. Because perception is everything, especially in hip-hop. Meanwhile, supporters of Ross continued fighting back. They pointed out something critics often ignored. The man has been successful for nearly 20 years. That isn't luck. That isn't marketing. And that isn't an accident. Ross built Maybach Music Group. He built a real estate portfolio. He built franchise businesses. He built partnerships. And he transformed himself from a rapper into a businessman. Those accomplishments are real. Regardless of what critics say. Regardless of what social media says. And regardless of what 50 Cent says. But according to critics, that still doesn't answer the larger question. How much of the image is branding? And how much is reality? That debate became the center of the controversy. Because when people started examining public records, financing reports, property costs, and tax issues, they weren't necessarily proving Ross was struggling financially. Instead, they were questioning whether the public image was larger than the reality behind it. Meanwhile, many industry insiders believe both men understood exactly what was happening. 50 understood that attacking Ross' image would generate attention. Ross understood that defending his empire would generate attention. And as a result, both men remained at the center of the conversation. Again. Just like they have for more than 15 years. Because according to many hip-hop analysts, that's one reason this rivalry never dies. It constantly evolves. One year it's music. Another year it's business. Another year it's social media. And now it's finances. Yet the underlying conflict always remains the same. Authenticity. Who is the real boss? Who is telling the truth? Who is winning? And who controls the narrative? Meanwhile, another reality became impossible to ignore. Neither side actually appeared damaged. In fact, both sides appeared stronger in terms of attention. 50 Cent dominated headlines. Rick Ross dominated headlines. Millions of people were discussing them again. Millions of people were watching clips. And millions of people were debating the same issue online. That's why some observers believe both artists ultimately benefited. Because attention remains one of the most valuable currencies in entertainment. And this feud generated plenty of it. Still, many fans believe 50 scored a major victory. Not because he proved Ross was broke. And not because he destroyed Ross' empire. But because he succeeded in making people question it. And according to many observers, creating doubt is often more powerful than proving a point. Because once doubt exists, every future move gets analyzed differently. Every purchase gets questioned. Every business announcement gets examined. And every success gets viewed through a new lens. That's exactly where Ross finds himself now. Meanwhile, Ross remains confident. He continues expanding. He continues investing. And he continues presenting himself as one of hip-hop's biggest bosses. Whether fans believe that image completely is another question. And that's the question that keeps this story alive. Because after all the interviews, after all the social media posts, after all the financial discussions, and after all the headlines, the internet is still debating the same thing. Did 50 Cent expose genuine cracks in Rick Ross' empire? Or did he simply create another viral chapter in one of hip-hop's longest-running feuds? According to many observers, the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. What is clear, however, is that this rivalry remains as entertaining as ever. And judging by the reaction online, neither side is finished yet. What do you think? Did 50 Cent expose real problems behind Rick Ross' luxury image? Or is Ross still one of the smartest businessmen in hip-hop today? Who won this latest round of the feud? 50 Cent or Rick Ross? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more hip-hop news, celebrity drama, rap industry updates, and breaking stories. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you in the next one.